All right, let's jump right into this deep dive, and we're going to try to understand what's happening with the EU energy crisis.
Yeah.
It is definitely heating up over there, and not in a good way.
Mhm.
This winter is proving to be a tough one. The energy crunch is making it even harder on folks, and we've got a lot of reports here for you. Everything from gas prices and pipeline infrastructure to some pretty strong opinions on who is to blame for all this.
Well, it's really fascinating to see how a bunch of events that don't seem related at all have come together to create this really challenging situation, like a perfect storm.
Yeah, let's break down this perfect storm then. Starting with Ukraine's decision to not renew that gas transit agreement with Russia. I mean, that was a pretty bold move, wasn't it? They had to know it would have a huge impact on gas flowing into Europe.
Yeah, it sent shockwaves through the market for sure. I mean, think about it. For years, a huge amount of Russian gas flowed into Europe through Ukraine. And when they made that decision, it was a major shift in their relationship. It really threw a wrench into Europe's energy plans. Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have Qatar, a major player in the liquefied natural gas market, the LNG market. They step in with a warning of your own. They're basically saying, hey, EU, if you keep pushing these regulations, we're going to have to rethink those LNG exports.
Yeah, and this brings up an important point about this delicate balance between sustainability goals and the immediate need for energy security. So Qatar's concern comes from the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. This requires companies to really examine their supply chains to make sure they are complying with environmental and human rights. And while the EU is working towards ethical sourcing of energy, Qatar sees it as a potential threat to their LNG exports.
So now you've got this tension between the EU and one of their main energy suppliers. And then just when you think it can't get any more complicated, Azerbaijan enters the picture. They were initially seen as this potential savior for Europe, a way to get away from using Russian gas. They even have that impressive Southern Gas Corridor pipeline network. But then suddenly they halt gas deliveries to Serbia and Bulgaria.
Yeah, the situation with Azerbaijan is the perfect example of how even the best diversification plans can be vulnerable. Despite the successes of the Southern Gas Corridor, there were some technical problems at the Shah Deniz Alpha platform, a crucial part of Azerbaijan's gas infrastructure. And that's what led to those stoppages.
So we've got Ukraine cutting off Russian gas transit, Qatar threatening to reduce LNG exports, and Azerbaijan dealing with these unexpected disruptions. You can see how this is a perfect storm for Europe's energy supplies.
And if we look at the bigger picture, it really shows the challenges of relying on any one supplier. In this global market that is so volatile, this isn't just a European problem. It shows how interconnected the energy markets are around the world. And it shows how geopolitical factors can influence them.
So let's talk about what impact all this has on the EU's gas reserves. Their storage levels have plummeted from 84% capacity at the beginning of January 2024 to just over 70% by the middle of January this year. That's a pretty steep drop, especially since we're still in the middle of winter.
Yeah, it's the fastest depletion rate they've seen since 2018. And it's making people nervous across Europe. If this winter stays this cold, they're going to have a really hard time replenishing those reserves before next heating season. They set a goal of 90% storage capacity by November, but that's looking harder and harder to reach with what's going on right now.
And of course, all of this is having a big impact on the price of natural gas in Europe. It's been crazy over the past month. In mid-December, prices were trending down. Supply concerns seemed to be easing. They stabilized at around 38 euros per megawatt hour. But
New Year came, and with it, the expiration of that Russia-Ukraine gas transit agreement. It was like a domino effect. It started this chain reaction in the market.
Exactly.
Okay.
And prices shot up to 51 euros per megawatt hour. That's the highest we've seen since October 2023. That's a huge jump. And it's hurting businesses and consumers.
Oh, and there was also that reported Ukrainian drone attack on the Turk Stream pipeline.
Right, I read about that. The last active route for Russian gas to Europe.
And while the attack didn't actually stop the gas from flowing, it definitely made the market nervous. It just shows how fragile these energy infrastructures are and how fast things can escalate.
So you've got these dwindling reserves, skyrocketing prices, and the possibility of disruptions looming over Europe. It's not a good situation.
No, it's a huge challenge for the EU, but you know what they say. Challenges often lead to innovation. So let's take a look at some potential solutions and alternative strategies Europe is exploring to get through this.
Okay, but before we do that, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, the United States. And more specifically, President-elect Trump's very forceful entry into all of this. It seems like he's given Europe an ultimatum. Buy more American energy or face the consequences.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold move, and it's getting a lot of attention. The EU already imports a lot of U.S. LNG. But Trump's demand for a huge increase in imports could really make things worse between the U.S. and Europe.
And what makes it even more interesting is that while Europe is scrambling, Russia has quietly been making their own strategic moves. They've managed to redirect a big part of their energy exports to other markets, mostly BRICS nations like China and India.
Yeah, it's a pretty smart move on their part. They're basically reducing the effect of Western sanctions and keeping that energy revenue stream going. And what's even more interesting is that India and China are now getting a lot of Russian energy, but they're also increasing their exports of refined products back to Europe.
Wait, so they're buying Russian oil and gas,
Yeah.
refining it, and then selling it back to Europe. That's a pretty crazy twist.
It shows how adaptable and interconnected the global energy markets are, even as geopolitical landscapes shift. And traditional supply chains are disrupted. New paths emerge. It's a fascinating dynamic to observe.
Okay, so we have this complex web of geopolitical maneuvering, supply chain problems, and crazy price changes. But let's think about what this really means for the people living in the EU. Are they going to freeze in the dark this winter?
Well, hopefully not. But people are definitely concerned. Energy prices are already making things hard for families and businesses. And if this continues, it could have a really big impact on people's lives. Imagine trying to heat your home or keep your business running. When energy costs are so high, it could lead to a lot of economic hardship.
And that economic hardship can lead to social unrest and political instability, adding another layer of complexity to all of this. It seems like every time Europe makes a little progress with this energy crisis, something else happens to set them back.
It's a really delicate balancing act. But the EU has faced challenges before, and they have always shown resilience and adaptability. So let's take a look at some of the specific countries that are most affected by all of this and explore the solutions they're considering. So let's look at Central Europe. The situation there is really shaky. The end of that Russia-Ukraine gas transit agreement has really hit places like Slovakia and Hungary hard.
Yeah, they depended a lot on that Russian gas coming through Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
What are they doing now to replace that lost supply?
It's a mad scramble. They have to find other sources. And that usually means more expensive options like LNG. And of course, those higher costs trickle down and end up hitting consumers in their wallets.
So less gas and higher prices, that's a double whammy.
Yep.
Their governments must be feeling the pressure to find some solutions.
Absolutely. Slovakia, for example, has been really vocal about getting gas transit through Ukraine back up and running. Their Prime Minister, Robert Fico, even hinted at some pretty extreme measures if they don't fix the problem.
Like what? What kind of measures are we talking about?
Well, he mentioned stopping those emergency power supplies to Ukraine and even vetoing EU support packages for them. It shows you how desperate they are to find a way out of this.
It feels like they're trapped. They need that gas. But they're also getting pressure not to work with Russia.
It's definitely a complex situation, and they're not alone. A lot of Central European countries are still really dependent on Russian gas. Even though they've been trying to diversify, losing that Ukrainian transit route has really exposed their weakness.
So how are they trying to fix this? What solutions are they looking at?
Slovakia's main gas company, SPP, is trying out swap agreements with Azerbaijan. It's a pretty creative solution.
Swap agreements.
Yeah.
What are those exactly?
Well, basically, Azerbaijani companies would buy Russian gas, and then they would deliver the same amount to Europe.
So it's a way to get Russian gas to Europe without using the Ukrainian pipeline.
Exactly. It avoids the political issues. But there's a problem. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is against these deals.
Well, yeah, I can see why. It would basically mean Ukraine is helping Russia get their gas to other countries while they're still fighting with Russia. Not a good look.
It's a delicate situation,
Yeah.
and it highlights how this energy crisis is tied up with geopolitics. There aren't any easy answers, and every solution comes with its own problems.
It's like a puzzle where the pieces keep changing. But this crisis isn't just in Central Europe. It's affecting the whole EU.
That's right. These rising energy costs are impacting people's incomes, industrial production, and it's driving inflation everywhere. It's a domino effect, hurting households and the overall economy. And it could slow down economic recovery, which would make things even harder for the EU right now.
We were talking earlier about Qatar's worries about the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Let's dig into that a little more. On the surface, it seems like a good idea, promoting ethical and sustainable practices in supply chains. But Qatar's energy minister, Saad Al-Kaabi, has some serious concerns.
His main worry is that following these new regulations could really hurt their profits, which could make them focus on other markets where those concerns aren't as big of a deal.
Like China and India, for example, they need a lot of energy, and they might not be as strict about where that energy comes from.
Exactly. And that puts the EU in a tough spot. They want to support sustainability, but they also need to make sure they have a reliable energy supply. It's a classic problem. balancing your ideals with reality.
So what's the EU doing about Qatar's concerns? Are they willing to compromise to keep this important energy supplier happy?
Well, the European Commission has said they're open to finding a compromise. They know that upsetting a major LNG supplier like Qatar would be a bad idea. So they'll probably try to figure out how to address Qatar's worries without changing the main goals of the directive.
Okay, let's bring President-elect Trump back into the picture. He wants Europe to drastically increase their imports of American LNG and oil. That changes things a lot. How is the EU responding to this ultimatum?
It's a complicated situation. They already import a lot of U.S. LNG, but Trump demanding they import so much more could really hurt the relationship between the U.S. and Europe. And there are also practical things to consider.
What do you mean by practical considerations?
Well, even if the EU agreed to buy more energy from the U.S., there are infrastructure limitations and existing contracts that could make it impossible to make such a big change quickly. It's not as easy as just flipping a switch. It takes time to build pipelines and change agreements.
It sounds like they're walking a tightrope, trying to balance their need for energy with their political relationships and the realities of the global energy market.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a challenge with a lot of sides that could affect many parts of European society.
All of this makes you wonder about the EU's long-term energy strategy. Can they really become independent from these outside energy sources? Can they create an energy system that's more resilient and sustainable?
Those are the big questions. The EU has made progress in promoting renewable energy, but it's clear that it hasn't been enough to get them through this crisis.
So what can they do now? What else is there to do?
They need to invest even more in renewables, wind, solar, geothermal. On a huge scale, it's a race against time, building a new energy system while the old one falls apart around them.
And it's not just about making more renewable energy, it's about storing it too.
Right. Advancements in energy storage technology are super important to make sure the energy supply is stable and reliable. Imagine having a massive battery pack. That could keep everything running even when renewable energy production dips. It's like a backup generator, but powered by the sun and wind. Pretty cool idea. But realistically, switching to a fully renewable energy system is a huge job. It's going to take time, investment, and a lot of political will.
Absolutely. But we also have to think about what Europe can do right now to get through this winter. How can they reduce the effects of this energy shortage in the short term?
Good question. What are some of the short-term solutions they're considering? Yeah, so we've talked about the long-term goals, but what about right now? People are really feeling the effects of these high energy prices. What can the EU do to help people cope with this in the short term?
Well, in the immediate future, it's really about minimizing the damage, putting things in place to protect vulnerable households from these crazy price increases. Things like direct financial aid, subsidies for energy bills, maybe even temporary price caps.
Yeah, that makes sense. Protect those who are struggling the most while working on those longer-term fixes. But wouldn't price caps just make people use more energy? I mean, if they don't feel the real cost, they might not try to save energy. That's a good point. And that's why you have to be really careful how you use price caps. It might be better to target them at certain industries or income levels. The trick is to provide relief, but also encourage people to use energy responsibly.
It's a tough balancing act, meeting today's needs while thinking about the future.
Exactly. And this is where public awareness campaigns can be helpful. The EU could start initiatives to teach people about saving energy, give them practical tips on how to reduce their energy use at home and in their everyday lives.
Yeah, those little things can really add up. Turning off lights when you leave a room, using energy-efficient appliances, adjusting your thermostat a little bit.
You got it. Every bit helps. And it's not just about what individuals do, it's about everyone taking responsibility. We need a culture of energy awareness across the EU.
This really shows how important it is for EU member states to cooperate and support each other. It's not about every country looking out for itself. It's about working together to find solutions that benefit everyone.
I agree completely. The EU has to share resources effectively, coordinate their energy policies, and be united in the face of these global challenges.
This makes me think about President-elect Trump asking Europe to import more American energy. While that could be a solution, it also makes you wonder about the EU's strategic autonomy.
That's a really important thing to consider. Diversifying from Russian gas is crucial. But becoming too dependent on one supplier, even a friendly one like the U.S., could create new weaknesses.
So it's all about finding the right balance, diversifying your sources, investing in renewables, reducing consumption. It's a multi-pronged approach.
Right.
and it's going to take a lot of effort and coordination.
It's a puzzle with no easy answers. But the EU has overcome challenges before, and I think this crisis will actually lead to innovation and a more resilient and sustainable energy future for Europe.
And maybe, just maybe, this could be what pushes the whole world towards cleaner and more sustainable energy. Because the challenges we're facing today go beyond national borders. We're all in this together. And finding solutions requires global cooperation and a commitment to a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. The EU's energy crisis is a wake-up call. It shows how fragile our current energy systems are and how urgently we need to transition to a more sustainable path. It's a journey that will need innovation, collaboration, and a willingness to think about energy in new ways.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the EU's energy crisis, I think the main takeaway is this. It's a complicated issue with big consequences, not just for Europe, but for the whole world.
It's a story that's still being written, and the choices made in the coming months and years will have a huge impact on Europe's energy security economy and place in the world.
It's a reminder that we need to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay committed to finding solutions that create a brighter and more sustainable energy future for everyone.
And as we continue to watch the situation unfold, I'll leave you with this final thought. What role will you play in shaping this energy future? It's a question worth thinking about as we try to understand this crisis and work towards a more sustainable and prosperous world.
That's it for our deep dive today. Thank you for joining us as we explore the EU's energy challenges. Stay tuned for future deep dives as we continue to explore the complexities of the global energy landscape.